If we title the episode Joan Scott, gender, useful category for the analysis of player characters.
Nobody will listen. I'm finding out that we were correct and that none of the the part of Waterdeep Dragon Heist where they're supposed to follow the clues to is absolutely totally not clear. They have no idea where to go or what to do, and I'm having to. They're plenty smart. It's just I'm realizing, none of this stuff makes any sense whatsoever intuitively, and that it's not. It definitely needs to be better spelled out, or NPCs need to be pushing them in the right direction.
Well, that's the thing about all heist or mystery or find a thing in a big open-ended city is you always need a million more clues than you think you do, and then you also need to make it 1,000 times more simpler, or more simple. Everyone wants to write a plot twisty, Agatha Christie mystery, but even a straightforward one, players build on. They make it more complicated than it ever needs to be. It's the beauty of role-playing games. It
is. And you also rightfully pointed out, I think, in the episode that their motivations aren't entirely clear. And, my players are pretty good to go. They'll bite on things. But also one of them was well, why do we care about this? And I was ugh. And I was I had to sort of get an NPC to sort of push them or ask them to help, because I was I don't know why you care about this. It's not a good reason.
Yeah, I was running a game very recently, and the plot was there's a bad guy. He's bad. He's a shitty. My favorite villain is the shitty teen bad guy.
I love the
who's
shitty
just
teen. He's just awful.
Whatever. Yeah, he's awful to everyone. You're did you murder all these people? It's I don't know, maybe, whatever.
It's
I don't care.
It's the Joffrey model. Nothing gets people more excited to hate somebody than an awful teen.
And my players spent a good 20 minutes being maybe there's someone pulling their strings. This one person was acting weird. It's they build a larger mystery around even something that's very simple.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, speaking of things you'll hate this. Okay, so there was a Kickstarter a while ago for a Savage Worlds campaign setting. We love Savage Worlds. And it's called Herald: Lovecraft and Tesla, a Savage Worlds tabletop RPG.
You showed this to me, and I was not in a good headspace to look at it. But tell me about what you you found.
So I did some research, and apparently there's a comic book that this is based off of, based on the idea that
for real somebody published. Oh no, yes. I thought this was just somebody's bad idea. Oh no,
no. It's now many people's bad idea. The idea of it is that H.P. Lovecraft, is not just a writer, but he's actually he's written all his weird tales and short stories, but he's actually those are happening in real life, and he's a reporter and an action hero. And who's there to help him out? Nikola Tesla and Amelia Earhart and Samuel Clemens, all there to fight evil.
It's the racist League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I love it. What a great idea.
Hey, Samuel Clemens, anti-imperialist writings about the Philippine-American War.
Actually, Sam Clemens,
he was a little racist, but
real life Mark Twain was actually a pretty cool dude. Read some of the things he said. Anti-capitalist, colonialist. But anyway,
the crazy thing is, you've taken this great role-playing game setting, filled with no big NPCs, where the players are one, the sort of Lovecraft mythos of the 1920s, and then you've populated it with a bunch of non-player characters who are way cooler than the players. And then you've also made them into something they're not.
Yeah.
Especially H.P. Lovecraft, who's not an action hero. He wore gloves his entire life because he couldn't touch anything.
He was a sickly, terrified, waifish New England elite. I mean,
he spent his entire life worrying about miscegenation. Yeah, he's not a hero.
Listen, folks, we like Lovecraft stories, and even his dry, tedious. There's a strength to the weird mind terrors that he had, that they created such impressive ideas that we still use them. But he was a racist and not a particularly good writer. So you don't. I already have like issues with like Nikola Tesla worship. He also a genius and deserves respect. But at the end of his life, was literally in love with a pigeon, and just like a very like weird and unusual man. I just. I don't have heroes is sort of what I'm saying. Everybody sucks, but also
let your player characters be the heroes.
Create your own heroes, but also don't go looking for people like. I have nothing useful to say here. This is a terrible idea.
So it's a terrible idea, and I just can't believe someone found a way to make 1920s Call of Cthulhu worse.
Worse somehow.
And so here's the crazy thing, right? Is I don't know if you've read this, but Alan Moore, bless his weirdo heart, basically wrote this comic book like a good 20 years ago. He wrote a comic book, one-off, called Necronomicon, where the fundamental idea is that like all of the H.P. Lovecraft writings were just actual observations. But H.P. Lovecraft was also still a weird racist weirdo. Right. And I don't actually recommend this comic book. I feel like it's very gory and gross and has lots of just too weird things. But I'm like, if you're going to do this as H.P. Lovecraft is weird, it's basically horrifying, like on the borderline disgusting. Like I can't actually even read it.
How do you make that into sort of like a fun like pulp adventure? Because the whole like if you're suggesting that like the Lovecraft stuff is real, that's monstrous beyond belief. It's like hideous like mind and body horror from start to finish and people going mad. Like there's no way to say, Lovecraft's actually seeing things that happen. And here he is riding an airship with Amelia Earhart and H.G. Wells and whoever and having a good time. They're not having a good time. It's awful. Everything is a nightmare.
I think pulp is fun, and I think they went the wrong way on this, and like you can do something spin on pulp, and it should be decolonizing pulp. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know if that's possible, but I think it is.
Oh, I love pulp too. I think that as it is
inherently imperial,
is imperialist, right? And this is, by the way, this will get us to sort of what we want to talk about next. Somebody had given us a very proper criticism that there are good things being done in steampunk, which is very closely related to pulp. And that there are some post-colonial anti-imperialist takes on it, which is...
I guess I should read some books besides The Aeronaut's Windlass.
So, and my main criticism is that most steampunk is still in very much a colonial imperialist mode, but if you wanted to flip it, now that would be a good use of the genre that is more than just aesthetics.
I brought up a weird Kickstarter. I did want to bring up one that is actually good.
Before we go any further, let's introduce ourselves.
Hello.
Hello. This is Dungeon Master of None. I'm Rob.
I'm Dungeon Master Matt.
And we talked all over each other. I'm Dungeon Master Rob.
Well, I thought we were doing a trade-off thing. Right?
Okay.
I'd say it breaks it up. Anyway, welcome to the show.
Yeah. So 10 minutes in, we're still talking about things, but talk me about the good Kickstarter before we get into it.
Okay, the good Kickstarter. I don't know if you've ever played the cooperative board game Sentinels of the Multiverse.
I have not.
It's kind of like playing Magic the Gathering, where you're all on a team fighting a big villain, is the way it mechanically plays. The idea behind it is it's pretty 4-color superheroes, and so each person playing the board game is playing a superhero. You all team up to fight an evil supervillain. It's a lot of fun. I mean, I have some critiques of the board game, like there's a little... sometimes making co-op games is difficult, but anyway, it's lots of fun. It's got great art. They finally released a role-playing game based off the world they've created for this board game. So it's, I think, called the Sentinels Comics RPG. I think it was funded in like 20 minutes. It already has like $500,000 or something like that. Anyway, you can always use more superhero games. Whenever someone makes one, I'm ready to try a new one. So
Matt and I are always on the lookout. The one superhero game that will actually do it right, that will end the constant parade of satisfying but not fully satisfying options. And yeah, I want to give this a shot for sure when it comes out.
So what's our topic for the show today?
Well, we're going to talk about DM tips. We're also going to answer some listener mail. Thank you all for writing in. And again, sorry that it takes us so long to get to it. I want to start with a criticism.
Ooh. Yes.
And we've gotten a couple. If you follow our Twitter account, you'll see an exchange that I had with a listener who disagreed with my take on cyberpunk and steampunk. And I tried to elaborate a little bit on that. But we also got a letter from Sally that was talking about our response to hopepunk. And I think that Sally raised some very pertinent objections, and I wanted to make sure to put this at the front of the episode.
You want me to read the crux of the letter,
Yeah,
Rob?
why don't you tell us what the core part of it is?
All right, here's Sally's letter. Hi again, Rob and Matt. I wanted to drop you a line about your genre episode. I just finished listening, and at the end, you invited people to write in if you made anyone mad. So here I am. I actually am not mad per se, but I am totally not here to defend hopepunk. Partially because it truly does sound like a muddled thought project, and also because I don't have a horse in the fight. The thing that did rub me the wrong way, though, was listening to two white men go on the offensive about this idea of hopepunk. I am totally 100% here for thoughtful criticism and deep analysis, but there are times when you guys sort of sounded mocking or condescending, and I try very hard to avoid white men being mocking and condescending on mics, which is why I really love your show in the first place. I am 110% sure you didn't realize you sound this way and that you didn't intend to, which is why I'm writing in. If you were two dudes who didn't seem like great dudes with good politics, I would stop listening and not bother writing it in. But all of a sudden, as I was listening, I kind of had this queasy feeling and thought to myself, I don't care about hopepunk, so why does this rub me the wrong way? I realized it's because you sounded more gatekeepery than I've heard you sound, and it reminded me of being at adventure league tables with dudes who are just here to tell people why the thing they like isn't a good thing at all.
This is a extremely correct and pointed critique, and Sally is right that wasn't my intent. And by the way, this is all my fault. I was the one who exposed...
It's all Rob's fault.
I was the one who exposed Matt to hopepunk and forced him to talk about it on the podcast. So that's on me.
No, well, that's not true. But thank you, Rob.
But it was my idea. Sally is correct that it was not my intent to sound condescending, and I did not realize that I sounded that way. And so I do want to apologize. That wasn't my intent at all. And Sally makes a very good point here in that later on in her letter, she points out that a lot of the people who adhere to this idea are marginalized populations. You know, the Tumblr, most people on Tumblr or a lot of the most active users are women, young women, people of color, queer people. And so for us to get on and start banging our drum about an idea that came from there definitely does have some questionable ideas about it. So
yeah, it sounds like one thing that I didn't realize is like, you know, this is Tumblr. This is not made for me.
It's not made.
So just leave it alone.
The reason why we ended up talking about it is because it ended up on Vox and other parts of the internet, but it really was never like intended for us. And
we just love reading Vox every day.
Love reading Vox. I also went back and listened to the podcast that it came from, and it was more nuanced than I gave it credit for. I still have strong disagreements, and if I can be clear, I definitely got too worked up about hopepunk. The reason why I got so worked up, and the reason why I placed this in an episode with cyberpunk and steampunk, is that I actually see these people as in a community with me, and that is the community of people who love science fiction and fantasy and want it to be better, and also the community of people who believe that we can have a better world. And so I tend to be critical of people who I see as sharing my my politics and sharing, you know, the things that I care about. I'm deeply, extremely critical of nerds who are gatekeepers or who are mean or who are needlessly rude to other people. And so when I started reading about hopepunk, I got frustrated because I think that we can do better. But I didn't really think through the way that would sound coming from me. So I want to be clear that I was critical because not because I'm, you know, dumping on some people who I think don't belong, but because they explicitly do belong. And I want us all to sort of adhere to a higher standard and ask better of ourselves. But it came off poorly, and I apologize for that.
Yeah, I pretty much, I think I agree with everything our letter writer said. I think one other failing that I can add on to our mini list of failings is that in that episode, we had a really good opportunity to talk about, so there's all these ideas, right? Cyberpunk and steampunk are definitely in a state of flux. People are proposing new ideas for things like hopepunk. Like, what should the future of science fiction and fantasy storytelling, at least from a role-playing games perspective, look like, right?
Yeah. I think it's Motherboard, but some fancy, maybe Waypoint, some fancy new science fiction vertical of some, new media website has been launching a hopeful or a future-focused science fiction series, and which includes like writers and videos, and I'm very interested to see what they come up with, and I would like to talk about at some point what an optimistic future science fiction looks like, but we'll have to come back to that. But we got a little carried away, and we were careless in our tone and presentation, and so we're sorry about that.
Yeah, same. But yeah, that was, I think, one of the best critiques and criticisms that we've gotten. So thank you for writing in, Sally.
And we were very happy to. Matt and I are very aware that we are wrong all the time. So if we're wrong, write in and tell us about it, and we will respond to your criticisms.
I should mention, Sally closes off by saying, that's it. I love your show, and I think you guys are great, and that's why I wanted to write in. Thank you so much for writing in, and thanks for the amazing criticism.
Thank you, Sally.
Should we take a quick break and do some Dungeon Master tips of all kinds that anyone can use in their game tomorrow?
That's right. All right, come back for tips on DMing.
Okay. So, Rob, we've done several episodes on dungeon mastering tips. I think they're some of our most fun episodes. We've talked about everything from, simple, easy things like trying to roll in the open to more complicated things like using improv and prepping situations as opposed to plots, how to steal from published modules, how to deal with burnout, doing recap blogs, playing to your strengths, mastering logistics. So we've got some more tips that build on those. I encourage our listeners to go back and listen to our other episodes if they haven't yet. New tips.
And, there's no shortage of these, but Matt and I have been doing this for a while, and we're both pretty okay at it, and hopefully we have things to share. You're going to find out pretty quickly that hopefully by now you'll be able to see the things that our strengths as DMs, and that there may be places where you can go to get other types of DM tips, but hopefully these are useful. And Matt, I think that you have a good one for us to start with, right?
So this is a super simple one, and you'll see online, a million different miniature stores and dice made of solid palladium and, all these fancy things. People who make their tables out of a 4K HD flat screen and all that stuff is cool and sweet if you can afford it. But if you're poor like me and just want some basics to get started, there's a million good ways to cheaply supply your Dungeons & Dragons game.
Yeah, and this is also... I'm also poor, but on top of that, I also bike everywhere. And so it is impractical for me to carry around...
Fucking Portland nerd.
I'm a Portland nerd, so it's impractical for me to carry around like a big old box full of minis. And so Matt has a particular suggestion for this.
Rob, I just had a really morbid thought. I hope you are... Listen, I don't want to make fun of the dangers to cyclists in America. Like, a cyclist is killed here in Houston every time. I'm just imagining a Portlandia sketch of two Portland police officers coming across you. You've just been hit by a bus, and they're like, he's picking up a character sheet with a pin so as not to get fingerprints on it. A crime scene guy's using tweezers to put all your dice in a evidence bag.
My bloody dice, yeah.
Another dungeon master
Another
bites the
dungeon
dust.
master down.
Listen, This is the third one this week. God damn it. Anyway, so you have to bike everywhere, right? And you need cheap stuff. You don't have to buy into spending $1 million on Dungeons and Dragons. I don't buy miniatures. For example, when I do play games that use a grid and miniatures, I have spent, no more than like $3 on it. If you go to a craft store or Amazon and buy little plastic or glass squares, you can use those as miniatures by taping images you've printed off to them. Print them off at work when no one's looking, steal color ink, and then boom, put little token print-offs on your squares. You basically have little tokens your players can move around the map, and you can reuse them every time you get a new bunch of NPCs.
Yeah.
Don't buy miniatures.
They're also...
Unless you want to.
There's also... Pathfinder had one of these. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this before, but there are several low-cost options where they have either paper or cardboard little, stands that are slips that you can put into the little, like, black bases. This is what... I forget which game did, but it's, you don't need to have like a full-on 3D die-cast, metal miniature. If you have just like a little like piece of paper or like cardboard stand-up, that's a perfectly good token. And they have different size bases, so you can do large and huge. And for 99% of, my games, that's totally fine. Now that I have a little more money, I've been thinking about shelling out for, tokens for, big bosses or significant, combats. But other than that, I would never spend, a full price on a miniature. But,
the same is true, right, for your mat as well. You can buy a $30 or $50 wet dry erase hex mat or square mat. You can also, if you're lucky, when no one's looking, steal those big whiteboard that you can write on with markers, right, from your office supply closet when no one's looking. That's free.
I also
don't get caught though.
In terms of like the maps,
that's what I do.
The maps that I've made, I've found that it's substantially easier, especially if I want to do like a large dungeon, to just put it on graph paper. I guess. Yeah,
this is perfect for mega dungeons, etc. Just put it on graph paper. Show it to your players.
I have a map or a mat, the erasable one, which I like, which I've had forever. But it's so frustrating because it only has so many squares, and so I run out of space very quickly. And it's been much easier for a lot of my dungeons to just put it on graph paper.
If you play a game that is mostly like, Theater of Mind is not exactly a lot of combat where you really need to plot out the squares people are in. The couple times you have a complicated situation where positioning matters enough. Just a sheet of paper and a pencil. Draw it out for your players. Put a little X where they are, erase where it is. It works just fine. You don't have to spend large amounts of money. Use a deck of playing cards and deal 5 of them out and say, the Queen of Hearts is right next to the villain. Move your token there if you're right there. Behind cover is the 2 of clubs, and just to keep track of things if you need to. But you don't need lots of things.
5th edition does have a lot of grid-based rules, and so with combat you do often feel like you need it, but you don't need it, and you don't need to really go deep on it. If you're not independently wealthy, do not ever go to the Dwarven Forge website. Do not ever look at any of the really expensive miniature offerings. You don't need that. That's not something that should be required of you as a DM.
I just encourage all our DMs, those who have a lot of expendable income or those who don't, just to try going it on the cheap.
Yeah.
I feel like there's this weird certain pressure once you start buying a miniature for every NPC that you'll always have that, and I don't like it.
I have
do what you want, but I like going cheap. It's fun.
I have trained my players to never expect anything from me in terms of material, and so whenever I present them with some, they get very excited.
There you go. Yeah, that's right. Make it special.
All right, Also, this reminds me, I also think this is something that you should offload to your players. And I'm pretty sure we've mentioned this before, but creating and shipping a Hero Forge mini costs $5 or something like that, or 6 or 7. And so if your players want a token for themselves, for their player character, which they should, have them do that. I think if you're bringing the books and all like the other things, I think it is well within your ability to say you guys can purchase and print and develop your own minis. That is also something that is brand new that, well, it's like last 5 years that, we didn't have growing up, which is truly one of the few great benefits of living in this late capitalist nightmare is that you can do things like have a miniature 3D printed and sent to you in the mail.
Yeah. Well, Rob's point about making handout special is a good one, because handouts can just be write it down on a 3x5 card, right? And when you don't have lots of other special effects, that becomes very special, right? Whether it's a special symbol or the description of a magic item, or even just the information about an NPC that has become one of the player's friends. Having that handout adds some cool stuff.
I do want to point out that there is, if you enjoy this, by all means do it. I play in a game with a DM who does tons of handouts and cards and tokens and has lots of minis and maps, but he also loves that stuff, and he loves painting minis, and it comes very easily and natural to him. And it's great to play in his game, and it's fun to see the distinction between our different DMing styles. There's some things that I'm good at, and there's something that he's good at. So if you're crafty, or if you're, you have a printer at home and you like using it, or if you like to paint minis,
if you like to buy new toner every week,
by all means,
you just love buying toner,
go for that. But I just want to make sure that you feel like you don't have to. There does feel to be an expectation for a lot of DMs that they provide a lot of stuff, and that's not in any way necessary.
All right, that's I think our first topic.
Okay, I have one, and as you'll notice, I tend to go pretty high concept with these because I'm a lazy and ill-prepared DM, and so a lot of my tips have to do with how you approach the game. And so one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is that the Dungeon Master sets the tone for the game, right? And I want to encourage those of you who either first coming to DMing or trying to up your game to think about what tone you're setting. And this can be as simple as if you arrive to the game and you're in a bad mood, or you're grumpy, or you're sullen, or you're, not really present, that's going to set the tone for the game. And that places a lot of pressure on you to be, friendly and high energy, but also be aware that, make sure that you're in the right headspace when you show up. But it also has to do with, if you're upset that your players are cracking too many jokes, or not cracking enough jokes, or they're not taking the game, they're not really approaching it in the way that you were hoping they would, bear in mind that's, you have the power to establish how the game is going to go. And so try to, when you're coming in, you don't have to stop the game and say, hey, this isn't a fun game, stop having fun.
Right.
But you can do that subtly, right, with how you approach the game.
Well, and I think you should do it, as Rob is saying, through positive reinforcement.
Yes.
As tone. I don't, and I'd love for someone to prove me wrong, but I don't think anyone's ever learned anything and actually taken it to heart through negative reinforcement or punishment. That is my personal experience as 9 years as a teacher. Humans, like puppy dogs, respond best to positive reinforcement. So if players are not mirroring the tone you want, right, draw attention to that tone and respond when players are getting the tone right. And, it's not and don't, come down on them for either too few or too many jokes, right? Yeah. Positively reinforce the tone.
Matt's absolutely correct. Nobody is ever going to enjoy your game more or play it the way that you want if you yell at them or, criticize them or give them a hard time when they do something wrong. But if you want players to be in character more often, and somebody does a bunch of great role-playing, say, hey, that was great role-playing. Here's an inspiration die. Or if you want them to be, if you want them to sort of pay more attention to your, fiddly little clues or whatever, or you're trying to encourage more investigation and somebody has a particularly keen insight, say, hey, great thinking, here's an inspiration die. Positive reinforcement, the game has built in this mechanic for it. You don't have to give them inspiration die. You can just say, hey, that was really good. And I do this all the time. If somebody's really playing their character well, or has done something that really pushes us forward, or makes us have a good time, I'm like, that was great job, whoever. And this is just like a great way to set the tone for your game. And that's a great point from a teacher's perspective. Nobody's going to respond well. They all come to your game to have a good time. And so you have even fewer tools than a teacher does. So just focus on reinforcing the things that they do well.
Consider giving your players grades.
Give them gold stars. Don't give them grades. And
actually, I have given players stickers for their character sheets before.
Not a bad idea.
It's a great idea. Everyone fucking loves stickers, man. People go gaga for stickers.
So if you're, we get a lot of people writing in about their players like not really like getting it, and boy, have I been there. And the best way to get the game that you want, in addition to just being open in communication with your players, is to reinforce the positive experiences. Don't single out if you have one player that's obviously getting it right. Don't create a teacher's pet, but like praise everyone individually when they do something that's like fitting with the idea that you have. And this takes time to get, but like think about it as you're starting to DM.
One great point that Rob made that we've kind of skipped over is how to show up right. How to arrive good.
Yes.
And that's tough. It's tough to always be in the right headspace for, a swashbuckling adventure or something like that, or a creeping eldritch horror, right? But really, I think it's very important, and there are many different ways of doing this. So this is your mileage may vary piece of advice, but I think it's important after everyone sat down and got settled, for the dungeon master to say, okay, we're starting. And then for you to sort of make that first 30-second move of either recapping or describing the situation. You may have your players give longer recaps, but by you speaking first, right, you've got that opportunity to give the first tone. And if that first recap is full of jokes and laughter, then you can encourage that. If it's full of serious creeping darkness, you can encourage that, etc., etc.
Yeah, this is a great point, and I feel bad because I am often a anxious and stressed person, and so I know how hard it is to show up somewhere and be, be in the right mood. But Matt makes a great point. You should be the one.
Just set your mood watch to
happy,
to enthusiastic, and press the button.
But Matt makes a great point that a great way to sort of to formalize this is make sure that let your players talk and settle in. But before you actually start playing, don't let somebody say, "Okay, I want to do this." Don't do that. You talk first. What you say, we're starting. Last time you were here, blah, 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 blah. Our adventurers did this. Spend 30 seconds to a minute recapping or establishing where they are, what they're up to. And then that puts you in control. And that also sets the stage for your players. Never, ever relinquish that moment. That is your DM chance to start the session off right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Starting in control.
Probably should have started there. Actually, that's like a much more concrete part of this, but make sure that you are literally establishing the tone by speaking first, but also bear in mind that's on you throughout the game.
Yeah, and again, it's up to you how long that first speech is, right? It could be 2 minutes. I'm sure there are many DMs who can do it in 15 seconds, right?
Yeah.
But it should be you announcing the start of the game and you announcing with your, through your actions and descriptions, the tone that you're going for.
Okay. Next tip.
All right. So this is, I think, my most vague one. And we've gotten lots of questions about theater of mind. If you're not familiar with what theater of mind is, it's the idea of not using any really visual aids while you're playing. So that means, no maps, no tokens, no miniatures, no grids, all that kind of stuff, right? And this is a very easy way to play once you get a hold of it. One concrete tip we can give you if you're struggling with how to do theater of mind is you've got to practice being what your players see and smell and hear, and you've got to practice being your players' senses.
Right. And I think there's a perception that theater of mind is easier or purer from a role-playing standpoint. This is something that a lot of people who come from Fate or from Powered by the Apocalypse, other more storytelling-based games, often move towards, but it is actually quite difficult to do theater of the mind well, and it places a lot of it's much more challenging for the DM because you actually have to do a lot more work. And that doesn't mean that you should steer away from this, but if your players are asking for it, if you feel pressured to do it, there's a reason why maps and grids and all the rules for combat exist, and it actually is so that some of the work can be taken off of a dungeon master.
Right, because you're going to have to describe what things look like for lots of players every time it's their turn or they want to act, and that can get tiring. But see, the advantage is, is when you have that map or grid out there, players often, instead of sort of role-playing, are role-playing in a way that they're just interacting with the map. And if it's not on the map, they don't think about it, and they're thinking in terms of a map. And if you want to get away from that, which is something you may want to do, theater of mind is a good option for you. But you've got to practice sort of being players' full sensory interaction with the world.
Right. And so learning styles are bullshit, but think about, some people when they're working through a difficult problem or like trying to, you're at your job and you're trying to, visualize something. Some people can just sort of like hold that in their mind, but some people absolutely have to like get a whiteboard out or a piece of paper and start drawing it out. And so if you're somebody who needs to see it written or see it drawn out, which is again, a totally like normal thing for a person to do, then this is not going to work out very well for you and that's okay. There are other ways to approach this, because in theater of the mind, you have to hold an image of the battlefield in your mind at all times, which for those of us with overactive imaginations or who are used to this is totally fine. I can do this. I can say, this is where everybody is and all of their characters are doing these things, but that can be very complicated for other people to hold in their minds, especially if you're trying to describe what it smells and looks like and how far away, the goblins are at all points in time.
To build on that, this is useful even if you aren't doing something pure theater of mind, Being the senses for your players sort of involves, I think, it's good to think about things in several layers, sort of the cursory layer of what they first encounter, and then what happens when they move further or see something, So you start with just sort of a general description of a room, a place, the what they hear and smell, and then prompt them to follow up as if they're a character in a novel with, well, I hear this chattering coming from the other room, I want to hear more, and then go deeper. So think about sort of levels of senses, and it's best to think about your the big three: smelling, hearing, and sight.
Yeah, and it is good practice for learning to be more descriptive and to start thinking about what your players are going to experience beyond just, a bugbear is 5 squares away and holding an axe or something like that. It's a good skill to develop, but don't feel bad if it doesn't come naturally, and it is something that takes practice to get good at.
And thinking in terms of senses, is also just a way to sort of answer that question that we get most often, but is often very general, which is, how do I help my players role play better,
Right.
Because if you think in terms of your players' senses, you get away from things where players are just like, well, I roll a perception check. What do I see, No, I scan the horizon, And then you can give them a description of the horizon. Or, my character squats down on their haunches and digs through the ashes of the campfire with their dagger, it helps them move in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
The one caveat I have is I tell my players what they see, what they smell, what they hear, but never what they feel.
Right. So this is a problem with a lot of amateur writers in the role-playing space, is that sometimes they will be describing, this happens a lot with like character descriptions in games and things. When you're describing something, don't say, unless there's, I guess, sort of some sort of like magical aspect to it. Don't say, you feel afraid, or, your heart beats faster or something like that. Be very descriptive, but let them decide how their character is responding to this particular moment. Don't impose an emotion or a reaction upon them. That's a good point.
Right. Let your players be the ones to say, oh shit, If you say, oh shit for them when a big scary thing arrives, you rob them of something.
Great points, Matt.
Coming soon, Rob's new spinoff podcast. You've robbed them of something.
Little do you know, I already have 20 episodes in the bank, and yeah.
Okay, should we take a quick break and come up with a final couple tips?
Yeah.
Well, Portland, Oregon, and slow gin fizz. If that ain't love, then tell me what is. Well, I lost my heart, it didn't take me no time. That ain't all, I lost my mind.
You want to give us the next tip?
I sure do. And this plays in a bit to my first tip about tone. And I'm going to put this in the category of things that are nice, but not necessary. But if you want to up your game, if you want to level up as a dungeon master, this is a good thing to start thinking about. But I want to encourage you to think about presentation as you're dungeon mastering. And when I say that, I mean how you speak,
your PowerPoints.
Your PowerPoints, exactly. I want you to have a PowerPoint for every encounter. Sorry, I'm going to come back to that.
Not a bad idea.
I want to come back to this. But I mean your posture, right? Your bearing, how you present yourself. One really simple, concrete part of this is during moments of high intensity, stand up. Stand up. I know that not everybody can stand all the time and that it's exhausting and maybe you just want to sit on your ass, and that's totally okay. But if you're in a very intense combat situation or there's a particularly important social encounter, stand up. Stand up, stand tall. It draws attention to you. It makes sure that your players know that something is happening. But in general, think about, carrying yourself upright, speaking in a way that, draws attention. I would, the real gold standard for this is obviously Matt Mercer. Watch him when he is DMing. Don't just listen, but watch. The way that he both physically carries himself and speaks naturally demands attention. And that is something, people, categorize this as charisma. Sure. And some people have it, and some, that is something that's kind of innate, but it can also be learned, right? This is a skill, and it has to do with public speaking. If Matt and I are both pretty good at public speaking. Matt is a teacher. He stands up in front of classrooms all the time and demands the attention of his students, which I assume he gets.
Supposedly.
He gets sometimes. I give talks in public, and I do okay at them. But if you had met either of us...
Next tip, sign up for a speaking circuit.
I think we actually already did this with Toastmasters, okay. But
that's right.
What I want to emphasize is that if you had met us in high school or even college, I don't know that you would have pegged either of us for powerful presenters.
Definitely not.
So the point is that this is something that can be learned, and it will. Whenever somebody writes in and they tell me, "Oh, my players aren't doing what I want I want them to do," or "Oh, I have trouble getting everybody on task," or whatever, it just makes me think that they are letting those dastardly players walk all over them. And a great way to do that, to not let them do that, is to demand their attention. And with your presentation, you can do that. It is easier to corral unruly players if you present yourself in a way that makes them pay attention to you.
Right.
And that is something
and it could be done through standing up, through lowering your DM screen, if you use one of those,
yep.
Right? Or changing the tone of your voice to often, one thing I always struggle with is I'm a very loud person, and I get louder and louder, right? Getting quiet often helps bring everyone back.
Same with me. I am a very loud person, and so when I speak more quietly, they know that something's happening. Yeah, it can be something very simple, like what Matt said. You lower your DM screen, or the first time you bring out your dice. I have a very fancy dice tray full of my heavy metal dice, and so when I first reveal them, people know that something is about to happen. You also stand up, sit down, or it can be more more general. It can be how you speak and the cadence and your tone. Your presentation can also be, in concrete terms, very useful for practical stuff. If you speak slower or build in a lot of pauses or speak in such a way that gives you time to think, I do this a lot. You don't want to sound like you're rambling or meandering, but if you are capable of sort of building in that tension or suspense, it gives you time to think if your players do something that you don't expect, which happens to me all the time.
Right. Especially this goes for NPCs. I feel like a lot of DMs feel like NPCs got to respond right away, but you need time to think, and so do the characters you're playing.
Right.
It's okay for an NPC to go,
Right.
yes, we could come to some arrangement.
Or, oh, yes, very interesting, yes. Oh, I have many things that I am thinking about that. Just, feel free to think about to add in pauses or
long
bits.
pauses are great.
Great. Yeah, that's actually a great point. There's often a perception, because, especially in America, because we were a very loud, talky culture, that any silence ever is bad. But learn to be comfortable with silence, learn to work with those. This is a good tip for life. Also, when I'm talking about presentation...
Cast the silence spell.
When I'm talking about presentation,
20-foot radius.
That doesn't mean that you have to be a thunderous presenter, with your, powerful presence. There are lots of very compelling speakers with all sorts of different styles that demand attention. There's lots of ways to do this that don't involve, necessarily being a loud and, impressive and fiery speaker. Sheryl Sandberg is a very impressive public speaker, and she does so in a way that is she draws you in with sort of intensity and intentionality, and she's very skilled at making you listen to her.
I enjoy her skill, and I enjoy her eventually destroying modern democracy with her skill. Well, one thing I wanted to say about silence is, Rob, did you? This is a sidebar behind the screen. Did you? I was so disappointed. I was really owned in a 5th edition game I was playing in, because they changed the way the silence spell works. Silence creates a 20-foot radius of where no sound exists around it. You used to be able to cast it on an object. In 5th edition, you can only cast it on a point in space. My favorite trick is basically to own spellcasters with the 2nd level spell by casting silence on like a coin and then like hiding it on their person or hiding it nearby, or using Mage Hand to float it around and keep it near them where they can't see it, so they can't cast any spells. You can't do that in 5th edition anymore. I'm very sad.
I think I was owned like this too, though unlike Matt, I don't usually use it on my players because they are not equipped to deal with that level of, sorry, no offense to my players. They would be entirely destroyed by having a silence coin slipped into their pocket.
I would never do this as a dungeon master. Sorry, this was as a player. Right?
Oh, okay.
Right. I feel like those like weird corner cases where you use the rules to do something probably too powerful for the spells should be best reserved for players, right, and not for dungeon masters.
I believe they have cast it on an object, though my players have not mastered the use of the spell silence. It usually ends up backfiring. This is actually
yeah, it can be real bad when you can't cast these spells.
I think the last couple times they've used it, they have incorrectly assumed that they were about to encounter a spellcaster, and then mostly just nerfed themselves by having a big zone of silence where the spellcasters can't do anything useful. But I think I was owned. I think I also forgot that they changed it to be only a point in space, which I think
it's way more balanced.
I mean,
that's you could do so many things with the old silence, because it's like,
well, you also get a save now against.
I mean, you can always dispel it, but like, here's what I did once: is I had, I think 1,000 copper pieces. I cast silence on one of them and threw them into the small room with the enemy spellcaster. What are you gonna do, huh? How are you gonna find the piece that has silence cast on it? I guess to cast detect magic, but you can't because you can't speak.
Yeah.
Fuck you.
But you can't do that anymore. It's a much more balanced spell. Okay, anyway, tangent over. Next tip, Matt. Presentation.
Let's talk about prepping social situations, right? We often focus as dungeon masters on prepping interesting combats where it's, one green hag and 3 quasits and a chain devil and 4 floating pools of lava to make something interesting, or prepping big plots, right? And connecting all our various threads. How do you prep social situations? How do you take that same intentionality into situations where you want to encourage players to interact socially with each other and with your work?
And I think that this is something that a lot of new DMs struggle with, especially when getting players to engage with their NPCs or to be interested in their NPCs. And for me, this is usually as simple as making sure that you see and understand your NPCs as fully fleshed out characters in and of themselves, with their own goals and their own desires and their own interests and motivations. And you can write these out. A lot of D&D modules do a good job of, especially for important NPCs, telling you about all of their underlying motivations. And I encourage you to read these. But if you're developing your own, or if there's an NPC that's not fully developed, just ask yourself what they care about, what they're motivated by. Bear that in mind. Maybe write it out on an index card, or have, a list. It can be just like 3 bullet points. Wants this, cares about this, is feeling this way today, or something like that. And that's a simple way to prep for a social situation that will make it feel more authentic to your players. It doesn't have to be a lot.
Right. I think the most basic thing is just what Rob said, having those fully fleshed out NPCs, right? If you want a social situation where there's lots of interesting talking and role-playing, try and have your players arrive right after something has happened.
Right.
Instead of, these NPCs just existing waiting for your players to arrive and go through a dialogue tree with them.
Mm-hmm.
Something just happened. Was it someone just got in a fight? Someone said something unkind? The two rival, the kingdom's prime minister and chief wizard just had a disagreement over foreign policy that seems to them irreconcilable. So have someone just got murdered, have something just happen right before the PCs arrive, or they arrive in the middle of that thing happening.
And Matt makes a great point about dialogue trees. You don't want that. Do not, you don't want your NPCs to feel like an NPCs in a video game. This is the strength of our format. This is what's good about tabletop role-playing games. But what I do a lot is, and I only do this with like really high stakes social situations where the players need something or from an NPC, and it's like there is like a failure option, right? If they don't do it right, then they will miss a critical plot point, or they will not get something that they need. And so in these, I build in a lot of if-thens to make it feel more dynamic, because I want them to succeed, right? I want them to get where they're going, but I want to make sure that they feel like they earned it. So
right.
If in the book, or if, in my mind, they need to make ask the right question and make a DC 15 persuasion check to get what they want, I will also say, okay, if that fails, here's some other options for getting, this is how the NPC will respond.
Right.
This is, and here's some other options for getting there. And sometimes I'll write out several. If it's not an agreeable, maybe I'll only give them like 1 or 2 chances to get to this, and then we'll move on. But usually it's good to sort of like have an idea of, okay, if the players say this, or they botch their roll, this is how the NPC will respond. And then they have like further options, and then if they botch those, this is how the NPC responds. And just have a contingency in your mind if your players don't approach the conversation the way that you expect. I find this happens a lot more with social situations than it does with combats. Combats, I can almost always predict how my players are going to behave. But if I have like an idea in my mind for how I think they're going to approach a conversation, they very often don't do that. And this is really, I think, important, especially if they need to do a specific set of things to achieve a goal.
To break down, I think 2 of the things Rob is saying there is you can map out complicated social encounters like you would a level of a dungeon, but instead of hallways and rooms, you have, ideas and people or groups of people and if-then statements and stuff like that. The other thing to sort of set out is if you have a social statement, sort of put in front of you, and this is a good steal from game design of storytelling games, what's at stake here, right? For a combat, the stake is often, do the players defeat the monsters defeat them, do the players capture one of the monsters, do the monsters run away, right? Put what's at stake in the social situation. Is what's at stake here the wizard concedes his control of the state militia, or is what's at stake here convincing the prime minister to go to war? Right.
Yeah.
Or finding out, who hired the assassin of the princess, right? If you can, put what's at stake in this encounter, and that can help you then guide your more complicated design.
Yeah, exactly.
The last thing is social situations don't have to be primarily between players and NPCs. It's usually a mix, but it could primarily be among players, right? And if you want to encourage that, my big tip for you is to give your player characters complete responsibility for the outcome of something, where they're not trying to do exactly what's been instructed of them by anyone else, where it's completely up to their choice, right? And there's lots of different ways to do this, and this can be difficult. But if they have complete control over an outcome or a decision to make, that will encourage players interacting with each other like nothing else.
One of my favorite things to do, and this is I think one of the things I am best at as a dungeon master, is giving my players a challenging choice where there is no good option. And this is possibly my favorite thing to do. Force them to choose between one NPC and another, force them to choose between two equally interesting rewards, force them to choose between two equally bad options, and then present it in a way that forces them to have a conversation about it.
Should the rogue scion who can't control her powers be imprisoned, sent to the cruel wizards who will help her control her power, or just killed because it's the simplest option, right? And then don't give them the out of, what would the Duke want us to do? Or what would our mentor want us to do? Like, you don't know. They just said handle the situation.
Right. They need to gain entry into the, to the wizard's tower, and they can align with either the violent and disruptive, anarchic revolutionaries, or they can get the aid of the repressive imperial regime. But either of them have bad actors and potentially bad outcomes, and they've got to work with somebody. They can't do this on their own, and so they have to make a decision about what sort of future they're creating for the kingdom if they choose the wrong people.
All right, we've got two final tips, I think.
I
Rob,
think so.
You want to jump in here?
Yeah, my last one is a pretty
because I'm already beating you at this tip.
Yes, yep.
I'm not talking.
That's right. Matt has alluded to my last tip, which is a pretty simple one, and this is something that's difficult to learn, but it is a skill that can be learned.
Indeed. Go on.
It's be a good listener. And what I mean by that is that you pay attention to what your players are saying, and also pay attention to what they're not saying. And this is something that you're going to have to pick up on your own. You're going to have to pay attention to your players, and you're going to have to just get used to being quiet and paying attention to how they're coming at you with information. This is also a great time to practice that silence thing. Be quiet and let people talk. But one of the things that we get most often is people saying, how do I do this with my players? And most of the time they're asking about very specific circumstances, but the answer is almost always better conversation with your players and also listening to what they're telling you. And
listen what they're telling you during gameplay, right?
Yes.
Because that's when they're most honest, in my opinion.
Sorry, Matt's making a great point that I wasn't clear about. Yeah, when they're playing. If they, the actions that they have their character take tell you what they care about, what's important to them, and also the way they go about it. If they seem frustrated, if they seem reluctant, if they seem angry, listen, pay attention. That tells you what's wrong and what's right with your game. And learning to recognize this, and this is just a lot of what we're doing is just general social skill stuff, but also it can be learned. And it wasn't inherently obvious to Matt and I. Look, I wish I could I wish I could take you all back in time, 15 years to when we were first starting out as players and dungeon masters, and how terrible we were. But, we have learned how to be better. And it is something, I think a lot of DMs come at this and say, oh, I'm not good at this. But it's not, most things that we are talking about are not innate. And by the way, most things in life are not innate. You can learn how to do most things. And learning to pay attention and to be quiet and to listen when somebody is telling you something in-game is one of the best skills that you can develop as a DM.
Let's break this down. Not trying to be condescending here, because this is honestly something I have had to learn. The first step in being a good listener is not talking. And this goes as a dungeon master. And you gotta be, it's a little scary to not talk.
Right.
To let silence fill the air, right? If you've ever been a teacher and led a discussion, sometimes you gotta let those fuckers just stew in silence for the first 3 minutes. It's really awkward before they're willing to all jump in and start talking. But you gotta get through it. It's okay to let everyone sit in silence for a few moments, right? And give your players the space to feel comfortable to talk, to speak.
This is something I struggle with in my games, especially if the players are so close to figuring out a clue or the right next steps, but they're getting frustrated, they're struggling, or they're having a conversation. Your instinct is to step in and to help, but let them talk to you, let them talk to each other, learn to be a little uncomfortable. You don't want them to be frustrated, you don't want them to have a bad time, but you do want to give them a little time to stew, like Matt says.
And I mean, you can't listen to your players if you spend 80% of a game session as the one with the mic, with the talking stick, so to speak.
So one great way to do this, here's a concrete tip if you want to know how to do this, is when your players describe something that they want to do to you, or ask a question, or say, I'm going to do this, repeat back to them what you think that they are saying to you, right? Say, okay, so you want to, and by the way, if your players are really good at describing it, this isn't going to work. But if your players aren't doing a great job of, not every player is going to say, my rogue, slips under the portcullis and, slits the guard's throat and, blah, 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 blah. Some of them are just say, okay, I kind of want to do this. So repeat back to them, say, okay, so what I hear is that you want to do, this thing, or your rogue wants to do this. Or if they're like, oh, I want to go to the market and buy something, you want to be like, okay, so you want to go to the bazaar district and you want to seek out an artificer to find this, right? Show that you hear what they're saying, and also that they'll say, oh, yes, that's right. Or they'll say, no, what I want to do is this. And that shows that you're paying attention to them.
Right. And it also has the handy side benefit of helping you avoid, nothing is worse than a situation where a bad consequence befalls a player's character, and they feel it was because you misunderstood their intentions or actions.
Yeah, this is a great thing to do so that you don't say, okay, so you jump off the side of the tower and then plummet 100 feet and die. You make sure you say, okay, so you look over the edge and it's 100 feet down. Are you sure that you want to swan dive from here? And they're like, oh, no, sorry. I thought we were somewhere else. I thought that this was only I thought there was something else I could jump to or something like that. This is just a great habit to get into, and it will make them feel listened to, and it will help you develop a better rapport and understanding.
Here's what I do is behind my DM screen, right? I don't use it to roll dice. I use it to keep my notes and monster stats, but I often also have a fresh sheet of note paper or blank paper, and I tend to write every character's name on it. And this is a great spot for you to take notes, right? Another great way to be a good listener, right, is to take notes on and pay attention. It helps you pay attention and remember what people are saying, right? So if one of your players is focusing on this, right, you can write, Daglier, interested in ruins, right? Mm-hmm. Dislikes gnomes, etc., etc.
So this is something I want to, again, this is like the last one.
I have a little note section for each player.
If you want to level up, practice really paying attention to your players and listening and giving them time to speak and trying to understand. Like Matt said, if you have the mic 90% of the session, that's not going to be satisfying for everybody. And you will speak
and you'll
more...
be tired.
Yeah, you'll be tired. You'll
so
speak more than everybody else naturally, but you can definitely give your players room to speak and to engage.
We have one last tip, one last general idea. I think this one's big enough we might do a whole future episode on it, which is learning to deal with mistakes that you've made or retconning or actually going back and changing things you did badly.
Yeah, this is a great question. And I think you should feel empowered to retcon things. Feel free to either make up an excuse for it, a wizard did it or something, or just change it if you think your players won't notice or not remember. Depends on how good they are at taking notes. But if something doesn't work or doesn't make sense, you have the power to retcon it. We live in a world where every comic book franchise has been rebooted a dozen times. So if Marvel can get away with breaking their universe and rebuilding it because old things didn't make any sense, you can do it too. So the first step is, if you make a mistake and want to change it, feel free to do that. And if your players fuss, tell them a wizard did it.
Yeah, I mean, the decision here, how you tell whether you want to do this, is sometimes mistakes, especially ones that players made, can lead to interesting gameplay for the rest of the campaign. But sometimes, it's basically you did something wrong where it made, everyone happy. I see, usually I want to retcon things if it was my mistake that negatively affected players in a way that makes the game less fun. So if it meets all three of those conditions, my mistake negatively affects the players in a way that makes the game less fun, then I'm going to consider actually, saying, okay, well, we said this happened, but it seems like this is actually the more logical solution. Got that wrong.
Yeah, and feel comfortable. I think you should feel comfortable, because there's just a lot of things that you as a DM have to keep track of, a lot of details, and depending on who you are, you may or may not be able to get them right every single time. I made a mistake in a game a couple weeks ago where I got a detail of something just wrong. Somebody was in the wrong place, and I, after an investigation check, gave the wrong information. And then later I was like, I'm sorry, that wasn't right. They were somebody. This person that you were following was somewhere else, and I'm sorry about that. And that was, in that moment, the best solution. I don't usually have to do that, but also I was just flat out read the wrong thing. I got the information incorrect, and it was important enough that I said, sorry, this was wrong. I want to correct that.
Yeah, and it's easy. And the thing is, you're never going to stop making a mistake or mistakes as a dungeon master. So, just come up with some easy ways that you wanna redo things, right? I think there's really two kinds of mistakes, right? There's big plot mistakes, and there's often like little adjudication mistakes, getting rules wrong and that kind of thing.
So for rules, and we've answered this before, but rules you want to establish early on. If I get say we are not, so, okay, I have a very specific opinion on this. I do not think you should ever stop combat or a situation to look up a rule. I think you need to establish early on, my ruling in the moment is correct, and if it's possible afterwards, we will correct it. And this does give you the unfortunate possibility of, having a New Orleans Saints playoff moment where, where it ends in a character death or something critical. But most of the time, it's not going to actually affect the outcome of a game significantly. And I just think that you just need to sit down with your players. We're not going to stop the game to look up a rule. And my ruling in the moment is what it is. If that's not how your players are going to be happy with that, that's an issue. But I don't think there's any other way to run D&D, in my opinion.
Not all of our listeners will want to do it this way. People who feel less confident in their dungeon mastering and their ability to rule fairly as opposed to correctly in the moment, they can feel less confident, because you can make a ruling in the moment that is rules as written, not exactly what the rules are, but, makes logical sense or is fair or gives the players a chance to succeed or fail based on the circumstances. You can be fair without being correct. And once you've mastered that, you can definitely go on this. But yeah, so making mistakes, it's okay to, just rule in the moment and then revise it.
And Matt makes a great point. That's fair, even if it's not correct. If you establish this is how it will always work, even if you get something wrong, your players will know, okay, this is how the DM approaches all of their confusing moments. And yes, I'm frustrated because, my spell works differently, but they may still be angry, but at least they can't accuse you, or they won't feel like you are singling them out or making an unfair decision. There's no way to ever resolve frustration completely, but this is, I think, the best way to approach it, because you can't always be 100% correct, and rules lawyering is poison to the game. It's never helped anybody. Nobody has ever had a better game because they got the rules more right. That's not true. There are probably some. Well, see, I don't even think like rules lawyers enjoy it. I think they just
can't help themselves.
So nobody has ever had more fun playing D&D because they got the rules more correct, or they corrected their DM. Maybe they won in their mind, but I don't believe that was a fun game for anybody.
This isn't the Caves of Chaos, Rob. This is Dungeons and Dragons. These are rules. Well, and one thing that you definitely want to avoid, in my opinion, with sort of retconning and making mistakes, is going back too far, especially with incorrect rulings, right?
Right.
If you, especially on the player's end, right? If you find out the player was using their familiar incorrectly, and that it could go past 100 feet, and then the players use that ability to find out some critical information that helps them in the campaign, you can't take that away from them. Just remind them from now on their familiar can't go past 1 mile or whatever the limit is, right? If you make a mistake, don't think about retconning as in changing the timelines of undoing that mistake and every subsequent consequence, right? Think about the easiest way to fix what is actually making the game unfun or unworkable while keeping everything else.
Yeah. 9 times out of 10, I just say, okay, sorry, that wasn't right. In the future, just do this instead. And usually it hasn't had enough of an impact to be game breaking.
Yeah. And the one thing, whenever you own up to a mistake, right, is it's often good, again, this goes in hand with listening, is before you launch into the next thing, is wait. Because I have had several times where I've, had to retcon something or just made a mistake in general, and I didn't wait to listen to my players, and I found out later, one of them was, usually mildly peeved that, this mistake in some way had some unintended consequence for their player or something like that. So just wait, pause, see if everyone's okay, right? And then move on.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that wraps up our DM tips. We're going to answer a little...
Stick around for some letters.
And we'll be right back.
I'm tired as fuck. Oh, I'm tired as fuck. Dry my eyes on the back of my sleeve and do my coat up. Oh, I'm tired and stuck. Oh, I'm tired as fuck. Put down the phone, put on my gloves and wish me luck.
Hey, we got letters. We got letters.
We got letters. So this
Keep sending letters. You can send your letters to P.O. Box 666, Castle Greyhawk, the world of Greyhawk, Earth, crystal sphere of Greyhawk, gray space.
Plane of material plane, prime material plane. Yeah.
Known multiverse. Send it in.
Everyone for writing to us. I know we're terrible at answering these. We're going to try to do better. This one's from Noah from last year. And sorry, Noah. Noah asks us about dungeon building. So Noah writes, hello, Matt and Rob. First off, long-time listener, first-time caller. I had a couple of points on the subject of dungeon building that would be great to hear your thoughts/advice on. And Noah lists several things for us to cover: maps, tips for drawing our dungeons, traps, where and when to use them, ecology/monsters, what makes sense in the dungeon, puzzles, when are puzzles a good fit, aside from using a treasure table, how do you go deciding what treasure that dungeon has, and all of the above. How do you use that to make a theme? And Noah, this is such a great email.
Great questions.
And a great question, and I want to spend more time on it. In fact, I think Matt and I are going to do an episode specifically on this, and where we're going to address each of these points.
Just on dungeons all the time, no dragons.
All the time, no dragons. So, Noah, thanks for writing in.
Feel like a dungeon dragon.
And thanks for the topic suggestion. We will, I think, well, why don't we say we're going to do this either next or in the next couple of weeks, because this is something.
Yeah, the next couple of weeks.
We have talked about this before, but I'm so glad you wrote in because this is such a great idea and this is just such a great way to frame it. So Noah, sit tight. One of these is coming soon. Thank you for writing in. We will absolutely do a topic on dungeon building.
My favorite part of this email is Noah goes on to ask, can you theme a dungeon too much? No. Have a blood dungeon. Everything's made out of blood. Crystallized blood.
Crystal dungeon full of crystal
crystals.
monsters, blue crystals, green crystals, purple crystals. It's all crystals all the time. No, you can never have a too thematic dungeon.
As long as you mix it up every level with a new theme. Okay. Thanks for the letter, Noah. Our next letter is from Scott. Scott writes, hey, Rob and Matt. First off, I love the podcast. I was asked to DM for a few friends a few months ago, and I wasn't sure what to do. Since the last time I participated in an RPG, it was the late 90s, and it was a GURPS campaign.
That is an old school. Yeah, that's a deep reference, Scott. A lot has changed since then.
In my scrambling to quickly amass general knowledge, I came across Dungeon Master of None and have listened to the entire run. Between y'all, a couple other podcasts, some YouTube channels, and a fuck ton of reading, I'm now firmly a novice DM. My specific question is about reading materials. I've been dipping into some of the books you mentioned. I was curious about a list or an episode of the podcast talking about authors, series, and their influences on you and how to use it for world building. I'm not well versed in fantasy, and I don't have friends who are, or it's not as applicable to D&D. We also have different tastes. I like the deep dives, but something more general would be greatly appreciated. Thanks again. It's my favorite RPG podcast. Best, Scott.
Thank you, Scott. Scott, this is a great question, and I know that I reference a lot of things in this podcast, but I've never actually done a list. So I was reading this, and I came up with a few suggestions. And Matt, I'm not sure how much overlap there'll be, but here's a quick list of things that I think are great fantasy books, but also expand the idea of what fantasy can be and do a good job of developing unique and interesting settings. And I was thinking about, so here's two that I was thinking about after our last podcast, and these are both by Elizabeth Bear, who is a great fantasy writer. And the first one is Karen Memory, which is actually a steampunk novel, or has steampunk elements, which sort of takes place in an alternate Pacific Northwest, Portland, Seattle, and is both a great book and builds a very distinct thematic and interesting world that you should read, and is a great way to get ideas for how to tell fantasy stories. The second, also by Elizabeth Bear, is Range of Ghosts, which does much the same thing, but it's set in sort of
Ghost Range,
a Mongolian steppe setting with again a very great and rich cultural and religious and political situation that she does a great job of establishing in a pretty tight and well-written book. I think there may be others in the series. I've only read the first one. But these are great for expanding your idea of what fantasy can be, but also a good setting and richly described, but not, overbearing.
I think Rob's recommendations are the best recommendations because he has better taste than me. Mine are going to be the cheap way out recommendations. If you want to read some fantasy that is, very different from stuff like Lord of the Rings, go back to some old school stuff. Reading any, and the good news is that you can usually find these for free and they're very short. Like Jack Vance Dying Earth short stories are very weird and very bazonkers and have tons of great ideas, heavy influence on D&D. It'll definitely get you to a different type of fantasy. Same with any of the Robert Howard Conan short stories, Conan the Barbarian. They're crazy racist and misogynistic, but if you need a good idea for like an evil temple or cult or treasure or ruin, right? If you just want to have your players plundering a dungeon, it's with a cool, weird monster in it. Perfect short stories for inspiration. The last is, I would say, Larry Nevin's The Magic Goes Away, a short story that is great if you want a high magic wizardy campaign. All those are very short. You could read each one in 20 minutes, one of each in 20 minutes.
These are great suggestions. All of these, also, they're good suggestions because a lot of these had influence on early editions of D&D that have sort of fallen by the wayside as a more high fantasy aesthetic has come to dominate, at least the most popular modules. But, Dying Earth and the Conan stories were critical parts of early D&D, for better or for worse. And so these are great ways to get an idea for how to build your fantasy world.
This is a great letter, Scott, and I think we have to schedule sometime in the distant future a whole episode where we go through our favorite picks from Appendix N, or maybe create our own Dungeon Master of None reading list for our custom Dungeon Master's Guide.
Yeah, I agree. We reference this a lot, and recent books have been very good about saying, here's where you should go for inspiration. But maybe we should have a full episode where we really drill down on our inspirations and what to read and, sort of the root ideas of a lot of tropes that we sort of take for granted. So we're going to put a pin in this, but hopefully that's a good place to start, Scott.
Yeah. Excellent question. Thanks for the letters, everyone. Keep them coming. dmofnone@gmail.com. All right. Give us our next letter, Rob.
So this one is from Abel, and Abel, thank you for writing in. Abel writes, "Hi, I have a question that it would be nice to hear you discuss. How do you think plot twists should be handled? And does a plot twist that changes the nature of the setting break the game for the players? Thanks." Thank you, Abel, for a twist. Good question.
What a twist.
And this is, I actually don't have a super strong opinion about this. I like plot twists. Depending on who you are, you may find them sort of cheap and cheesy. I usually find I'm like a little child with a lollipop. I get very excited by plot twists, and so it's easy to entertain me with one, even if it's poorly done. So yeah, I'm a big M. Night Shyamalan fan, even his terrible things, because I'm easily delighted by a plot twist. But yes, ooh, yay.
Jingle those keys.
Turns out the real monster is man. Anyway, it's a cookbook. It really depends on you and your players. I think it's very easy to do a plot twist poorly. And again, I really like it, so it doesn't bother me, but your players may not enjoy that, and they would be right to do so, especially if you're turns out you aren't in a fantasy setting at all, but you're actually in a VR simulation, and you wake up and, have to fight your way out of this grim, dark, dystopian future. So, be discerning, but I think that if you earn goodwill from your players, you get away with a lot of a plot twist. I don't know, Matt, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, the one I try and avoid because I feel like it's been done too many times. But again, it depends on your players, right? If they're completely new, then who knows, right? Is the plot twist where the main quest giver NPC, another thing I try and avoid, is actually the bad guy, right? Yeah. And the players have been working for this bad person the whole time. It can be fun, but that's the one I try and avoid. All other plot twists, love them.
If you're going to do that, you need to develop a very deep and complex and believable character, and you want to have some sort of nuance in it. You don't want to just have an evil mustache twirling villain who's been manipulating them the whole time. You want to have some depth to it. But yeah, be careful with your twists, and
changing the nature of the setting can always be fun, but you got to make sure it's something your players would be into, right?
Right.
The worst thing you could do is build a setting that they really love and then take it away from them.
Right.
Unless your idea is you're taking it away from them with the hope that they can one day get it back.
Right. Or that what they're replacing it with is more interesting in some way, or better, or challenging in a different way. So again, I'm pro plot twist. I think that it is very easy to be ham-handed about plot twists, and that they are often a tool of a weak writer or a weak DM, but think they're just like any other narrative tool. They're just as good or as bad as you make them.
Write us back, Abel, if you have a specific plot twist in mind. Let us know how it went or what you're thinking of.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for writing in and for listening.
Send us your emails at dmofnone@gmail.com.
You can also add us on Twitter, @dmofnone. And please, if you have a chance, leave us a review on iTunes. 5 stars is great.
It helps other people find the show,
so they can also hear our ramblings. And yeah, we'll see you all next week. And
thanks for listening.
And keep rolling them dice.
Yay!
as I combine all the juice from the mind. Heal up, wheel up, bring it back, come rewind. Powerful impact, boom from the cannon. Now bragging, try to read my mind, just imagine. Vocabulary's necessary when digging into my library. Oh my gosh, eating I do stew like the one picked to toss. All over the track, man. Pardon me, as I come back. As I did the I had to beg your pardon. When I travel through the turn, I roll with the squadron. Row, like a dungeon dragon. Change your little jaws cause your pants are sagging. Try to step to this, I will twist you in a turban and have it smelling right like some old stale urine. Chuckity choco, the chocolate chicken, the rear cock diesel, but cheeks they were kicking. Yo, bust it out before the bust another round. The rhythm is in sync. The rhymes are on town. Ripping up the sound just like a ratio. Observe the vibe and check out the scenario. Yeah, my man, motherfucker.
So what's the scenario? Check it. Here we go, yo. Check it. Here we go, yo. Check it. So what's the scenario? Here we go, yo. Here we go, yo. So what's the scenario? Here we go, yo. Here we go, yo. So what's the scenario?